Number 6. Bloodletting and leeches. Until quite recently, if you ever got sick, there's a good chance your doctor would have prescribed bloodletting. What seems to be the matter? Headache. Bloodletting. Bad back. Bloodletting. Leprosy. Bloodletting. Plague. Bloodletting. Apoplexy. Bloodletting. Syphilis. Bloodletting. Broken arm. Bloodletting. Broken heart. Bloodletting. Blood loss. Bloodletting. He's dead. Oh, sorry. Can't help you there. Well, we can always give it a go. Bloodletting was popular for at least a couple of thousand years. Many cultures around the world independently came to the same conclusion that removing blood is a great way to cure sick people, regardless of what's wrong with them. The ancient Egyptians and Sumerians used bloodletting, but the Greeks and Romans refined the practice. In classical times, people believed the world consisted of 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water. They also thought humans were made up of 4 humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. These corresponded with the 4 elements. According to their doctors, illnesses came from an imbalance of the humors within the body. Blood was considered the dominant humor, so the best way to balance the humors was to remove some blood, obviously. Such treatments remained common in Europe right up until the 19th century. As well as a cure for various ailments, bloodletting was also performed before childbirth, surgery, and even amputations. Before removing a limb, it was considered necessary to siphon off the same amount of blood from the body that the soon-to-be chopped-off limb was thought to contain. Well, that kind of makes sense, but not really. One famous recipient of bloodletting was the United States' very own first president, George Washington. When he came down with a sore throat, George asked for some of his blood to be removed to help him get better. "I've got a sore throat coming on. Rest up in bed?" "No, don't be silly. Call the doc to take out some of my blood, and I'll be right as rain." 2 days and more than 5 pints of blood later, he died. Several techniques for bloodletting were used. Often so-called barber surgeons performed the operation rather than actual medical practitioners, since they possessed both the sharp razors and steady hands required for the procedure. Barber surgeons also carried out amputations for similar reasons. These bloodletting and limb-lopping activities are why barbers today still display a white and red pole outside their shops. Red for the blood and white for the bandages. Something to remember next time you go for a haircut. "A bit off the sides, please." Another popular method of bloodletting was leeches. Back in the day, France imported around 40 million of these medicinal blood-sucking worms, and people were sometimes worked on by as many as 50 at a time. Sometimes leeches were left on until the patient passed out from the blood loss. "Doc, I've got a headache." "Leeches it is." "Actually, you know what? I don't really feel that bad after all." Even after bloodletting went out of fashion, people still turned to it on the premise that it's better to do something than to do nothing. But thankfully, it's long since been discredited since we've realized it does more harm than good. Number 5. Urine treatments. Nowadays, it's common to provide a urine sample to help your doctor work out what's wrong with you. But spare a thought for the doctors of medieval Europe. First, doctors took your sample and consulted a color chart to identify your problem. Next, they put the file to their nose and took a good sniff to see if that gave them any further clues. And after that, you guessed it, they took a sip and swirled it around their mouth to complete the diagnosis. Doesn't exactly make being a doctor seem like a desirable profession, does it? "What's wrong with me, doc?" "Tastes like syphilis to me. You need to get yourself to the barber for bloodletting. I'll write you a prescription." Down the years, urine has had a whole range of other medical uses too. It was drunk as a medicine in ancient Egypt, Greece, and Rome. And it also appears in Ayurvedic and traditional Chinese practices. Among other things, it was thought to cure conditions affecting the kidneys and liver. In ancient Rome, collecting and trading urine was a legitimate job, and those engaged in this employment even had to pay a special tax. Most recently, in Europe, urine was drunk as a cure for the plague, and people also took urine baths for the same reason. Although how they managed to collect enough of it to fill a bath is another question. Perhaps they asked all their neighbors to chip in? And then, did they all take turns for a soak? So many questions. Urine was also used on the battlefield to clean soldiers' wounds. The sight of combatants taking turns to relieve themselves on each other after the fighting was over was not uncommon. "Hey John, my arm's off. Can you come and help me out?" "No problem. Can you do my ear after that?" It turns out, urine is actually more sterile than the kind of water they'd have had access to, so perhaps in a weird way, this makes sense. At other times, ladies rubbed urine on their faces as a kind of skin cream. Like modern cosmetics, it does contain urea, so perhaps there's something to it. But smelling of pee to improve your complexion is not a trade-off many modern women would accept. Mixed with ash, urine can treat a rash on a baby's bum, and you can also swill it around your mouth to whiten your teeth. Nice teeth! Probably best to stick to regular mouthwash, eh? Number 4. Dead mice. The ancient Egyptians had a fairly advanced understanding of medical science for the day, but the key words here are for the day, because a lot of what they considered medicine is what we would now call magic. Some of their cures were pretty dubious, and when they weren't bloodletting or urine drinking, they might be mashing dead mice up into a paste. Dead mouse paste mixed with other ingredients was then applied to the teeth and gums as a remedy for toothache. Quite how effective such a cure proved to be can only be guessed at. Perhaps the paste did provide the sufferer with some temporary relief because they were suddenly far more concerned with a revolting taste of rotten mouse in their mouth. Or perhaps it just encouraged toothache sufferers to grin and bear it. In any case, next time you're putting off going to see a dentist for a filling, just remind yourself of what the ancient Egyptians had to go through. Toothache, is it? Number 3. Corpses. Ancient Egyptians would try anything to try to get better, and another medicine they came up with was mummy powder. Mummy powder is exactly what it sounds like. They took a dried up mummified body, ground it into a powder, and then consumed it as medicine. The belief in the healing properties of mummies was also prevalent in medieval Europe. Any well-stocked apothecary would have had a jar of powder sourced from looted Egyptian mummies. The idea that consuming human parts has health benefits has been prevalent throughout history. This is partly due to the notion that eating the dead transfers some of their spirit to your body. For this reason, Romans drank the blood of recently fallen gladiators and ate their organs to gain the gladiators' vigor and strength. Behind a lot of so-called corpse medicine is homeopathy, the idea that like cures like. So for example, you cure a headache by consuming ground-up human skull. Charles II, the King of England, Scotland, and Ireland, was known for his devotion to an elixir known as King's Drops, a concoction of ground skull with alcohol. Since his predecessor Charles I had been executed by beheading, perhaps he thought a daily dose of King's Drops might help him keep his own head on his shoulders. Number 2. Mercury. Mercury is a naturally occurring element. Due to the fact that it's the only metal that's liquid at room temperature, it's perhaps no wonder that the ancients believed it had magical properties. As a result, people turned to mercury as a cure-all medicine. Some people even believed it could grant them eternal life. Unfortunately, mercury is highly toxic, and consuming it leads to all kinds of nasty medical complications. It makes you go deaf and blind. It causes neuropathy, a disease affecting the nerves. It makes you lose coordination, and it makes your muscles weaken. It's an all-around bad idea to go anywhere near it, but this is something the ancients didn't know. One of the most famous victims of mercury poisoning was Qin Shi Huang, the first Chinese emperor. He's the one who was buried with terracotta warriors near modern-day Xi'an. After unifying China, he hoped to live forever, so he took a course of mercury treatments. Ironic, really, because that was what killed him after all his rivals failed. As well as the ancient Chinese, the Greeks and Persians, among others, also believed in the power of mercury, and it could be taken as medicine or applied as a kind of rub. Even up to the 20th century, it was used as a cure for a range of diseases, including syphilis. Actually, there are some reports of mercury having positive effects on syphilis infections, but it also killed the patients through liver and kidney damage. So, if you've got syphilis, it's best to avoid using mercury to get better. In fact, it's probably best to avoid catching syphilis at all, if at all possible. It makes the idea of becoming a medieval monk and taking a vow of celibacy suddenly seem a more attractive option. Number 1. Trepanning and lobotomy. One of the oldest ancient cures is trepanning, a procedure that involves drilling a hole into the patient's skull. There's evidence that it was used as long ago as the Stone Age, and like bloodletting, the practice arose independently in various parts of the world. Evidence for ancient trepanning has been found in China, Peru, Greece, parts of Africa, and Polynesia. It's not clear why people thought it was necessary to drill holes in each other's heads, but one idea is that it was done to release evil spirits. This may have been an early treatment for epilepsy because evil spirits were thought to be responsible for the convulsions. However, the idea that trepanation was done as a cure for headaches is probably not true. Far worse than trepanation is the more recent practice of lobotomy, which had its heyday in the 1940s and 50s. It involves severing certain connections within the brain so different parts of the brain are no longer able to communicate with one another. It was used as a treatment for mental disorders such as depression, as well as neurological conditions such as epilepsy. The effects of being lobotomized are predictably devastating. Patients, or perhaps more accurately, victims, frequently undergo severe personality changes. The procedure can also lead to dementia, and many lobotomized patients were left institutionalized for life. The practice fell out of favor by the end of the 50s, although, somehow, some lobotomies were still carried out in France as recently as the 1980s. Fortunately, none of us are ever likely to have to endure any of these treatments, so we can all be grateful for that. Which one would you choose if you had to go through one of these ancient treatments? And what order would you put them in, best to worst?